Joining us now is Ali Boguhn. Ali is the political and campaigns editor at RH Reality Check, and she's been following the politics around this new Supreme Court nomination. She joins us now to talk about that and maybe one or two other things too. But Ali, first of all, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So we've been looking at the Supreme Court nomination. We know a little bit about the nominee, that he is considered a centrist, that Republicans have said nice things about him. We also know that Mitch McConnell has said they won't consider his nomination because on principle, supposedly, it's just wrong for a president to nominate a Supreme Court justice in the latter part of his term. So that's kind of what we know as a little zero-hour community here. But how is this going to play out in either the presidential or some of the key Senate races? Let's start out with the presidential. You've been following this. Is this going to be a campaign issue going forward?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's already a campaign issue. Republicans, especially, have a lot to say about this. They all, unsurprisingly, think that the Senate should not move forward with a nomination and talk about it at length, including what kind of litmus test they would pick to pick their own Supreme Court justice candidates should they be elected. So we see a lot of mention from people like Ted Cruz that we can't trust Donald Trump to pick somebody, and we should trust Ted Cruz because Ted Cruz said so. And he would use litmus tests such as would they overturn Roe v. Wade, things of that nature, to help decide. Meanwhile, Clinton and Sanders are calling on the Senate to do their jobs here and hold a hearing. And so we see that this is going to be split on party lines, and that in the Republican race especially, the candidates are already using it to attack each other.
Well, okay, they're using it to attack each other, and I would say, at least in terms of what they're saying there, by contrast, Clinton and Sanders sound pretty close to one another, not only in their support for the current nominee, but in what they have said they would ask or expect in their own nominations should it should it not be resolved this year. And what they're looking for is somebody who will overturn Citizens United and so on. So what we've got now is a case of Ted Cruz and the others applying their own litmus test. But what about the situation as it stands now and how that affects a presidential race? Meaning, eventually we're going to have a Democratic nominee and a Republican nominee. Are they likely to use the Senate's inaction, or for that matter, the fact that Obama nominated somebody, are they likely to use that to go after one another in the general election?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say how it's going to go now until we really see where the Senate goes with this, because who knows, honestly. And I imagine that once we get closer to the general elections, we're going to see Republicans and Democrats, whatever nominees we end up with, using this to contrast each other. What litmus test would they use? Should we hold Republicans accountable for the Senate's inaction, if that's what it comes to?
Right. That's what I was driving at was, do you think they'll hammer the Republicans on not acting? It seemed to me that that's what Obama was trying to set up by picking such a moderate or centrist judge, somebody that the Democrats had said, that the Republicans had said nice things about. It seems like he's saying you won't even do your job when I give you somebody you like. So he's queuing up an issue for the Democrats in the fall. But, I have to tell you, Ali Boguhn, that, as I watched the Republicans talk about this, it seems amazing to me, but they sound like people who think they have a winning issue in their unwillingness to do their job. Do you think there are those in the Republican Party who really think they can win votes by saying the president sent us a nominee and we said no way?
It's hard to say. I'm not quite sure what they're thinking. It's interesting because 7 current GOP senators actually voted in 1997 to confirm this specific justice, Garland, to the U.S. Court of Appeals. So now when they say we're not even going to consider him, that's kind of suspicious. And we see polling out there that says in key Senate races that this is an issue that does matter to voters. and that they are less likely to vote for GOP senators who are refusing to even consider a candidate. So it's who knows why they're sticking to
Right,
this.
right. Well, one reason will obviously be ideology, and they don't want someone who's not a fanatical right winger in there. But let's look at another um, angle. Now that's interesting. Let's pivot to the Senate races for a second. So there is polling out there that says it will hurt some Republican senators running this year if they're perceived as not doing their jobs and not voting on this nominee.
Yeah, last month the public policy polling found that residents in states that have key Senate races, very competitive ones, such as New Hampshire, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, all of which are considered pretty key races that could help flip or preserve the Senate majority. Um, Voters in those states said that they should have this seat filled on the Supreme Court, and they would be less likely to vote for the Republican senators who are refusing to even consider that.
Now, who are some of the are these races with incumbent senators in them, Republicans?
Yeah, all of those races are. That would be like Rob Portman in Ohio, Kelly Ayotte in New Hampshire. Those races.
And are those considered close races, tight races?
They are. They're all very tight races. They're very competitive, and they're key to. They're so close that that is why they're considered key.
So, okay, then, and we're talking with Ali Boguhn from RH Reality Check about the politics of the Supreme Court nomination. So, this is why we're hearing from various sources that one possible scenario is that some of these senators, like Kelly Ayotte and Rob Portman, might break ranks. So far, it looks like Mitch McConnell has kept these guys really under on a tight leash, and they've been staying with the party. But I guess the thought then is that some of these senators might break ranks with their party and say yes, they do want to vote for this nominee, or at least vote on this nomination, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're already seeing some of these senators, such as I believe both Portman and Ayotte, have said that they will at least meet with Garland at this point, which is kind of a big deal. So that's kind of breaking that whole facade of complete refusal to even acknowledge a nominee.
So we're seeing fault lines, fracture lines in the United Republican front against having a nominee here. I guess that's what part of what we're seeing here, right? So
Definitely.
let's talk about the politics of the left for a second here. I know a lot of people were on the left side of the spectrum were disappointed with Merrick Garland as a pick. He's a white male. He's older, and I think the first thing I always look at a judicial nomination is, are they young, so they're going to be there a really long time. He's older. He's white male. He is not hard left by any means. Have you heard anything about? I mean, obviously, every Democrat will, I presumably on the Hill will support his nomination should it come up for a vote. But have you heard anything at all about disaffection in the ranks, or have you not been covering that so much?
I haven't really been hearing about that as much. It's definitely not as big of an issue. We're hearing a lot more calls from Democrats for senators to hold a hearing and make a nomination, make a decision one way or another.
All right. Well, which is great politics for them and makes a lot of sense. So let's pivot, if we can, Ali Boguhn. You've written about the fact there was one outcome from recent primary voting. We've heard a lot about Trump. We've heard a lot about Sanders versus Clinton and so on. But one of the outcomes of the latest round of primaries that we haven't heard a lot about, you covered, and that is the prosecutorial vote. We've heard a lot about police brutality and Black Lives Matter this year. Can you tell us a little bit about the prosecutor story?
Yeah, so what we're seeing is there were two major prosecutorial elections, primary elections that happened in the Chicago area and the Cleveland area, where essentially what happened was there was an upset, and the incumbent candidates were voted out already. So those were both involved in key cases of where they were criticized for mishandling police brutality, including the cases of Laquan McDonald and Tamir Rice.
So we've had now, in a way, this is almost. I don't know if I'm reading too much into it, but it feels almost like the first electoral test of the Black Lives Matter movement. Historically, prosecutors have had impunity, it seems, to Democrats as well as Republicans to get too cozy with the police, to not be even-handed in their handling of cases of police violence. You had these terrible cases of Laquan McDonald in Chicago, Tamir Rice in Cleveland, and now we're 2 for 2 in terms of prosecutors, as far as I know, in terms of prosecutors coming up for a primary and losing that primary. What do you think the significance of that is?
Well, actually, the Marshall Project had a really good post on this yesterday as well. And they noted that a 2009 study found that 95% of prosecutors win re-election, although they do normally run unopposed. So what we're seeing here is, I mean, it suggests that people are wanting to hold their prosecutors accountable. And we saw, at least in Chicago, a lot of organizing from protesters affiliated with Black Lives Matter and other groups, really making those moves and working to organize to get prosecutors out of office and hold them accountable.
And did social media play a role in this? Black Lives Matter is a social media creation in many ways. It first appeared on social media. Did social media, you think, have anything to do with the defeat of these two prosecutors?
I mean, it's hard to say definitively, but at least in Chicago, they did do a lot of organizing around the hashtag Buy Anita, to help get Anita Alvarez, their prosecutor, out of office. And I mean, it appears that that was at least in part successful.
So, all right. So this may be a warning to prosecutors everywhere to prosecute in every case, including where the police are involved, or face a possibility of rejection by the voters. So, Ali Boguhn of RH Reality Check, thanks so much for coming on the program and talking to us about these stories.
Thanks for having me.